My mother had a stroke on Sunday night. She was 69 years old, and she had been healthy, or what passes for healthy when you are 69, meaning she walked every morning and took her medications and saw her doctor twice a year and did everything she was supposed to do. She was not someone you expected this from. She was the kind of woman who outlived things, who showed up at other people's funerals and squeezed their hands and drove home and made dinner, who had buried her own parents and her sister and a marriage and come through all of it still standing. She was not supposed to be the one in the bed. My sister called me at 11:15 on Sunday night. She said, "Mom, hospital, come now." I live in Portland. My mother lives in Cincinnati, where I grew up. It is a 4-hour flight with a connection, and there were no direct flights until morning. I booked the first one I could find, and I sat in my apartment with my coat still on, and I did not sleep. I landed at 7:40 in the morning. My sister picked me up. She looked like someone who had not slept either, which she hadn't. She told me what the doctors had said: ischemic stroke, left side. They had caught it quickly enough to administer treatment. Prognosis cautiously okay, but the next 72 hours were important. She said cautiously okay twice, and I understood that this was the thing she was holding on to. The hospital was large and beige and very cold, the way hospitals are cold, like they want to remind you that certain things are clinical, not personal. My mother was in a room on the 4th floor. She was awake when we arrived, groggy, her face slightly uneven in a way that was new and frightening, her left hand not moving the way it should. But her eyes found me when I walked in, and she said my name, and it came out clearly. Donna. One clean word. I took her hand, and I did not let go for a long time. We took shifts after that, my sister and I, trading off through the day, going to the cafeteria, making phone calls, sitting in plastic chairs and watching the monitors. I had been awake for more than 30 hours by Monday afternoon, and I was operating on coffee and the specific adrenaline of crisis, which keeps you going until it doesn't. On Monday morning, before I had found my rhythm, I was walking back from the coffee machine when a nurse fell into step beside me. Her name tag said June. She was maybe 40, with the particular manner of someone who has worked in hospitals long enough to know when something needs to be said and when it doesn't. She said, "Are you Donna, the daughter from Portland?" I said yes. She said, "I need to tell you something. I've been debating whether to say anything, and I've decided you should know." I stopped walking. She said, "There's a patient in room 14. She's been here for 3 weeks. Different floor, different condition. She came in with a hip fracture. Her name is Frances. In the mornings when I do my rounds on her floor, she asks me, 'Has a woman named Donna come in yet?' Every single morning for 3 weeks, before she asks about her own condition, she asks about you." I said, "I don't know anyone named Frances." June said, "She knows your mother. She said they were close a long time ago. She asked us not to say anything. She didn't want to intrude. But she's been asking about you every day, and I thought..." She paused. She said, "I thought you should have the chance to decide for yourself." I stood in that hallway with a cup of hospital coffee going cold in my hand. I said, "What room?" Room 14 was on the 2nd floor, in the orthopedic recovery wing. A different world from the cardiac floor where my mother was. Quieter, more settled, the crisis already past, and the long work of recovery underway. I walked slowly. I was not sure what I was walking toward. The door was partly open. I knocked anyway. A voice said, "Come in." She was 71 years old, small and neat, sitting up in the bed with her gray hair combed and her hands folded in her lap, like someone who had been expecting a visitor and had prepared. There was a book on the bedside table and a pair of reading glasses folded on top of it, and a small photograph in a frame that I couldn't see clearly from the door. She looked at me. The look on her face was something I will not forget. It was not surprise. She had known I was coming. She had been asking for me every morning for 3 weeks. It was something older than surprise. Something that had been waiting a long time and had almost stopped expecting to arrive. She said, "You look exactly like your mother did at your age." I said, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Frances Alderman. I have known your mother since before you were born. Please, sit down. I'll tell you everything." I sat in the chair beside her bed. She told me that she and my mother had grown up together, in the same small town in eastern Ohio, 3 houses apart on the same street, from the time they were 5 years old until they were 22. Best friends in the way that only happens in childhood, when proximity and time and the particular intensity of growing up create something that has no adult equivalent. They had been in each other's lives for everything: school and heartbreak and the deaths of parents and the beginning of adult life. And then my mother had moved away. She had met my father in her mid-20s and followed him to Cincinnati and built a new life, the life I grew up in, the life I had always understood as the whole of her history. She had kept in touch with Frances for a while. Letters at first, then the calls becoming less frequent, the way calls do when lives diverge far enough. And then one day the calls had simply stopped. Not a fight, not a falling out, just the slow fade of 2 lives that had moved in different directions. Frances said, "I tried to find her a few times over the years. The first time was maybe 10 years after she moved. I had her address, but the letter came back. She had moved again. I found a phone number eventually, but it was disconnected. And then life happened, the way life happens, and years went by." She said, 42 years went by. I said, 42 years. She said, "I thought about her every so often, not every day, but regularly. You know how there are people in your life who were so much a part of it that they never fully leave? She was one of those people for me. I used to wonder sometimes where she was, whether she was happy, whether she had children. She always wanted children." She looked at me steadily when she said that. She had a hip fracture from a fall in her kitchen 3 weeks ago. Her daughter had flown in from Denver and gone home after the first week. She was managing the recovery largely alone. And she was in a hospital in Cincinnati because she had retired here 12 years ago to be closer to a grandchild, and Cincinnati was where she had ended up. The same city as my mother. She had not known that until after she was admitted, and a volunteer had come around with a local newspaper, and she had looked at it idly and seen a name she recognized in the community announcements section. A fundraiser, my mother's name listed among the organizers, and she had gone very still. She said, "I read that name 3 times. I thought, it can't be. And then I thought, it could be. And then I didn't know what to do about it." She had asked a nurse to look up whether a woman by that name had any family members currently in the hospital. Apparently this was not standard practice, and the nurse had declined, politely, to do it. But she had started asking the nurses on the morning rounds, "Had a woman named Donna come in?" Just that. Every morning. For 3 weeks she had asked, not knowing if my mother was even sick, not knowing if there was a Donna to find, just asking on the chance that the thread would pull through. And then my mother had her stroke, and I had come, and June had decided I should know. I sat with Frances for 2 hours that first morning. We talked about my mother, about who she had been at 20, at 22, the version of her that predated me by years. Frances told me things I had never heard. My mother had been funny in a way I recognized, and quiet in a way I recognized, and brave in a specific situation involving a flooded basement and a neighbor's dog that made me laugh out loud despite everything. She told me about a year when my mother was 19 and had a difficult time. A year she had never spoken about to me, that I had not known existed, that Francis had apparently helped her through, with the particular steadiness of a person who shows up and does not leave. I said, "She never told me about that year." Francis said, "Some things people keep, not because they're ashamed, because they belong to a time before anyone who knows them now existed, and there's no easy way to offer them." I went back upstairs to my mother. She was better that afternoon, more alert, more herself, the unevenness in her face already slightly less pronounced. She squeezed my hand with both hands. She asked about my flight. I said, "Mom, there's someone in room 14 who wants to see you." My mother's face went very still. I said, "Francis Alderman." The stillness lasted about 5 seconds. Then my mother closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were wet. She said, "She's here?" I said, "She's been here for 3 weeks. She has a broken hip. She found your name in the newspaper." My mother said, 3 weeks. I said, "She asked about me every morning." My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Then she said, very quietly, "I thought about her so many times. I just never—" She stopped. She said, "I didn't know how to find her after so long." I said, "She found you." They met on Wednesday, when my mother was stable enough to be moved in a wheelchair. I pushed her down to the second floor myself. Frances was sitting up in bed with her reading glasses on, and she took them off when we came through the door, and the two of them looked at each other across 42 years of separate lives, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Frances said, "You're old." My mother said, "Look who's talking." They both laughed, the specific laugh of people who shared a language for so long that it comes back immediately, like a song you haven't heard in decades that your body still knows. I left them alone. I sat in the hallway outside for 40 minutes, and I let them have whatever they needed to have. When I went back in, my mother was talking about my father, telling Frances about their life together, the good parts and the hard parts. And Frances was listening the way she apparently had always listened, completely, without interruption, nodding slowly. My mother was discharged 2 weeks later. Her recovery has been good, not perfect, the left hand still not quite right, but better than the cautious okay they had offered us that first morning. Frances was discharged a week after that. Her daughter came back from Denver to help her home. Before she left, Frances gave me the photograph that had been on her bedside table. I had never gotten close enough to see it clearly while she was in the bed. It was my mother, young, maybe 21, sitting on the steps of a porch somewhere with her hair down and her head tipped back and her eyes closed, laughing at something. The kind of laugh that comes from 2 rooms away. The kind I had heard my whole life and recognized immediately as hers. Frances had carried that photograph for 50 years. She said, "I kept it because I missed her. And then I kept it because it seemed too late to let it go. And then it was just part of what I carried." My mother and Frances speak every Sunday now. I know because my mother told me, and I know because when I call her on Sunday evenings, she is sometimes already on the phone and calls me back. She sounds different on Sunday evenings than she used to. Lighter, like someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally found somewhere to set it down. My mother came home to a different house than the one she had left. Not literally, the same rooms, the same furniture, the same curtains that have needed replacing for 3 years and that she has been meaning to get to. But different in the way that things are different after something has almost been lost and then wasn't. She moved more carefully at first. She rested more than she used to. She let me and my sister do things for her that she would previously have refused to let anyone do. which was its own kind of change. But there was something else different too, something quieter and harder to name. She called Frances every Sunday. I heard about it first from my sister, who had been visiting that first Sunday and had found our mother on the phone in the kitchen, laughing, actually laughing, the unself-conscious kind, and had stood in the doorway and watched for a moment before going back out to give her privacy. My sister called me afterward and said, "I don't know who she was talking to, but I haven't heard that laugh in years." I knew who she was talking to. I drove back to Cincinnati in September, 6 weeks after my mother came home. I wanted to see her, but I also wanted to understand something. Wanted to sit with her in her house and ask her about the years I hadn't known. About that year when she was 19, the one Frances had mentioned. About the life she had lived in the small town in Ohio before she met my father and moved away and became, to me, simply my mother. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner. I told her I had talked to Frances, that Frances had told me some things. Not everything. I let my mother decide what to tell me and what to keep. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "How much did she tell you?" I said, "Enough that I know there was more to you than I understood." My mother looked at the table. She said, "There is always more to a person than their children understand. That is just how it works. You see the version that was made for you. The rest lives somewhere else." I said, "Did you want to find her? Over the years? Did you ever try?" She said, "I thought about it. I didn't try. I was afraid of what it would mean if she didn't respond. If too much time had passed and we had become too different and the thing I remembered between us didn't exist anymore. I was afraid to find out." I said, "She was afraid of the same thing." My mother nodded slowly. She said, 42 years is a long time to be afraid." I said, "It is." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "The nurse, June. I want to send her something, a card at least. Do you think that's appropriate?" I said, "I think she would like that very much." My mother nodded. She got up and went to the drawer where she keeps the cards, and she pulled one out and sat back down and started writing. I watched her hand move across the card, still slightly slower on the left side, the after effect of the stroke that may be permanent or may continue to improve. The doctors have said both are possible. But still her handwriting, still the specific, careful cursive she has had my whole life. She wrote for a few minutes. Then she looked up and said, "Do you think they'll let me send this directly to her unit?" I said, "I think you could call the hospital and ask." She nodded. She licked the envelope. She set it in the outgoing mail pile with the particular decisiveness of someone who has decided something. June received the card. She told me about it the one time I called to thank her properly, a few weeks after everything had settled. She said she had read it 3 times and kept it in her locker. She said, "It's the nicest thing anyone has ever sent me at work." I told my mother that. My mother said, "Good. She deserved it. She made a decision. Those are hard." She was right about that. The decision to speak is often harder than the thing you're deciding to say. June had waited for days, she told me. Whether it was her place, whether Frances had a right to her privacy, whether intervening in something she didn't fully understand was the right call. She had decided yes. She had pulled me aside in the hallway with my cold coffee and she had said, "I need to tell you something." Because of that, my mother and Frances speak every Sunday. Because of that, I know about a year when my mother was 19 that shaped her in ways I am still learning. Because of that, there is a photograph on my mother's refrigerator. My mother at 21, head tipped back, laughing, that Frances had carried for 50 years and finally let come home. My mother looks at it sometimes when she passes. She doesn't say anything about it. She just looks. I think she is looking at the person she was before she was anyone's mother. Before she was my mother. The person Frances knew. The person who has been there all along, underneath everything, living in a room I didn't have access to until a nurse decided to speak. I am glad she spoke. Some threads are too important to leave unfinished, even after 42 years.